Good afternoon. My name is Shiva Khoshnoud. I'm a biomedical engineer who is interested in neuroscience. I got my PhD in in biomedical engineering, working on neural correlates of impaired time perception in children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This project and my interest in time perception later led me to join Mark Wittmann's team at the Institute for Frontier Areas of Psychology and Mental Health in Freiburg as a postdoctoral researcher, where I had the opportunity to work in the context of virtual time. So I worked there for 3 years in this project. In the context of virtual times, I investigated the neurophysiological and behavioral correlates of passage of time. And after finishing my part in this project, currently I'm working at the Institute for Neuromodulation and Neurotechnology at the University of Tübingen, exploring possible brain circuits that directly relates to the impairments in clinical populations like stroke patients using mostly neuromodulation techniques. So in the context of virtual times, I investigated mostly neurophysiological correlates of passage of time in a naturalistic environments like playing video games, for instance. Why we used playing video games? The reason was that the main goal of virtual times is to develop a VR-based game technology to manipulate time perception. And there are several ways to manipulate time perception, and one of them is by inducing this so-called flow state. According to the Csikszentmihalyi, who is the researcher that for the first time explored and studied this mental state, flow is an optimal experience that occurs when an individual acts with total involvement and is also accompanied with a sense of enjoyment. Flow experience is linked with less sense of self and less sense of time or losing track of time. Because of that, as a group in IGPP, we used flow to modulate perception of time. And we utilized game-induced flow for this purpose. And we recruited people, invited them to come to the institute. We asked them to play games while we were recording their physiological and neural signals. And then we looked at the possible correlates of flow, what happens when they are in the flow state. Well, the most challenging, I think, in our project, I think time itself is the most challenging part because time is always present in every activity, and a subjective sense of time is one of the key components of our actions and behavior, which enables us to adapt to the environment. But there is no time sense organ, or there is no single pathways that carries this information, and all sensory channels support time perception. This was one of the main difficult parts. And also timing occurs in a varying timing scale, so from millisecond to years. And at intermediate durations, multiple mechanisms are active and operate in parallel to time perception, which makes it difficult to find a simple structure and neural information processing model for time perception. So I think this is the most challenging part when we wanted to investigate the possible neural correlates of time perception, because every time it depends on the interval that we used, different mechanisms was also involved. So it was hard. Yeah, maybe. So the field of medicine was always fascinating for me, and it was because of that that I chose biomedical engineering as my major for my bachelor's study. So I wanted to be in the engineering field, but be close enough to medicine. And then at the biomedical engineering, I had the chance to kind of investigate and analyze different biomedical signals. After my master thesis, my curiosity about the brain, how it works, neural correlates, and all of that led me to realize that I should change my path to neuroscience. So I did my PhD in the field of neuroscience, exploring possible brain mechanism differences in ADHD children that are relates or that relates to their impaired time perception. I think for me, neuroscience is a perfect interdisciplinary mixture of biology, physiology, and human behavior. So you can use biology to interpret the physiological phenomena and to explain it, and then to explain human behavior based on that. So I think my interest for neuroscience comes from this background that I had. And yeah, with the progress in the recording, in the analysis of the brain signals and decoding of the brain, the use of technology is a main important feature here, which makes brain accessible to the researchers. So I think neurotechnology is also important in this case. Yeah, so in the past 3 years, I had a lot of time to investigate and study this. So there are several ways to manipulate and modulate perception of time. And so one of them is emotion, for instance. The other one is interoception. The theoretical basis of this modulation based on emotion and interoception is based on the studies that shows bodily states and emotions, or more precisely, sense of self creates time perception. Perception of time is based on perception of self. And many literature, many studies have suggested that these interoceptive signals could act as a central clock, like a central clock in the body, similar to the cognitive models of time perception. So if you, for instance, modulate emotion, you can modulate time perception. If you, for instance, modulate interoception, enhance interoception, this can enhance perception of time. So one way for me to use virtual environment is to modulate emotion. For instance, imagine being in a waiting room, in a virtual reality waiting room, with the people that are smiling to you or showing positive emotions. This can modulate your perception of time. The other way that I can think is considering the association between the sense of self and sense of time. If we could alter the sense of self, we could alter sense of time. And this modulation or alteration of sense of self is quite easy with virtual reality. So you can use virtual reality to induce states that with less self-referential processing, for instance. The flow state is one of the examples of that. So the experience of this accelerated passage of time while playing the VR video game is one of the examples of showing that altered sense of self or diminished sense of self can lead to altered sense of time. Or virtual reality can be used to manipulate time perception by speeding up or slowing down the whatever is in the environment, in our so to speak periphery. So it has been shown that speeding up of the virtual sun affects time perception, or the results of our Yulish group in Virtual Times project. They showed that density and velocity of stars coming toward you in a Starfield virtual environment can affect your perception of time, your passage of time. So I think there are a lot of scenarios that you can use virtual reality to manipulate and change perception of time. And these were just examples of what I know. Yeah, we conducted different experiments. Just I want to mention some of the results. So our findings showed that the more parts, for instance, we recruited gamers and non-gamers and asked them to play video game, a commercial video game, and then we evaluated their perception of time, their level of flow experience, and also we recorded their EEG and ECG signals, the whole neurophysiology. Our results showed that the more participants were absorbed in the game, the less they thought about time and the faster time passed for them. And this was the explicit evidence for flow to be a mental state which leads to losing track of time. And also on the other side of the spectrum, we also investigated being in the virtual waiting room and how time passes. So we saw that being in a virtual waiting room was more boring than a real waiting room, leading to increased thinking about time and slower passage of time. If I want to talk about neurophysiological results that we got, we found that the processing of cardiac afferent information can be used as a measure, as an objective measure to assess the level of flow. More precisely, the amplitude of heart evoked potential, which is an index of processing of cardiac information in the brain. The amplitude of these potentials was positively correlated with the level of absorption. So the higher your absorption was, or the higher the absorption of the players were, the higher the amplitude of heart evoked potential was. And this could be interpreted in a way that flow and absorption in an activity necessitates more information from the body, so more efficient and active brain-heart interaction. This was one of the main results that we got and was important because we found a neural correlate of flow, which is very there are a lot of inconsistent results about that. We also tried to identify the possible markers of time perception, neural markers of time perception and interoception. The most important question was whether there is an association between interoception and time perception, which we found associations between interoception as a subjective questionnaires or as a marker as a heart evoked potential amplitude, and also time perception. So there was an association between interoception and time perception. And yeah, that was the most of the results in a nutshell that we got.